It was one of those late nights at a small roadside diner, the kind that bikers and truckers often stopped by to grab a quick bite and a hot cup of coffee. The neon sign flickered, the air smelled of fresh fries and burnt coffee, and the steady hum of conversation filled the room. Among the customers was a group of Hell's Angels, their leather jackets catching the dim light as they talked quietly among themselves. But none of them expected that this ordinary night would turn into something unforgettable. A young waitress moved carefully between tables, her expression tight, her hands trembling slightly as she poured coffee into cups. One of the bikers, a tall man with a long beard and calm eyes, noticed her unease. She was polite, but distracted, constantly glancing over her shoulder. When she finally reached his table, she leaned in just enough and whispered, almost trembling, "He won't stop following me." The biker froze for a second, his spoon halfway to his mouth. He turned his head slowly, scanning the diner. That single sentence flipped the entire atmosphere. The Hell's Angels were known for their rough looks and tough image, but behind that leather and steel was an unspoken code: protect those who can't protect themselves. The man she spoke to gave a subtle nod to his crew, and without a word they began to watch. Sitting across the diner in a corner booth was a man pretending to read a menu, but his eyes weren't on the food. They were locked on her. Every time she moved, his gaze followed like a shadow. It was clear now who she meant. The waitress returned to the counter, trying to act normal, but her steps were quick, her breathing shallow. The biker walked over casually, his boots heavy on the linoleum floor. He leaned on the counter, ordered another coffee, and spoke low enough for only her to hear. "You're safe now. We got you." Her eyes filled with tears, relief washing over her face for the first time that night. The man in the corner didn't notice what was happening. He was too busy staring, too lost in whatever twisted obsession brought him there. But the Hell's Angels weren't just watching anymore. They were moving, subtly, strategically. Two of them took seats near the door, one near the back exit, another outside by the bikes. They weren't planning a fight. They were ensuring she wouldn't be left alone when her shift ended. As the night went on, the stalker grew restless. He stood up, pretended to stretch, and walked toward the counter. The waitress froze, her face draining of color. But before he could reach her, the biker from earlier stood between them. The stalker stopped, realizing the size difference, the confidence, and the unspoken warning in the biker's stance. "Something I can help you with, friend?" the biker asked, his tone calm but edged with steel. The stalker stammered something about just wanting to pay his bill. The biker didn't move aside. "Then pay it and leave," he said, voice steady and cold. The diner was silent now. Even the cook behind the counter stopped what he was doing. The stalker glanced around. 4 more bikers had stood up, all watching him. There was no anger in their faces, just silent authority. He dropped a few bills on the counter and quickly walked out the door. Outside, the sound of motorcycles idling echoed through the night. The Hell's Angels waited to see what he'd do next. Instead of leaving, the man lingered by his car, leaning against it like he was waiting for her shift to end. That was when the bikers decided enough was enough. They stepped outside, their boots crunching on gravel, surrounding him without a word. The leader walked up slowly. "You're done here," he said. "You don't follow her. You don't come back. Ever." The stalker tried to protest, but the sound of engines revving drowned out his words. The message was clear. If he crossed that line again, they'd be there. Inside, the waitress stood by the window, watching, tears streaming down her face. She had been scared for weeks, never knowing when the man would appear again. She'd reported it before, but no one took her seriously. Tonight was different. Tonight, someone finally stood up for her. When the bikers came back inside, she thanked them, voice shaking. The leader just smiled, leaving a generous tip on the counter. "You take care of yourself, kid," he said before turning toward the door. Word of that night spread quickly through the small town. People had always judged the Hell's Angels by their looks. The loud bikes, the tattoos, the leather. But stories like this showed another side, one most never got to see. Beneath the rough exterior was loyalty, a deep sense of justice, and a willingness to protect those who couldn't defend themselves. The waitress's life slowly returned to normal after that night. She no longer looked over her shoulder every time a car passed by. She started smiling again, laughing with regulars, living without fear. Every now and then, a group of bikers would ride past the diner, their engines roaring down the highway. She'd step outside, wave, and they'd honk in return. It was their quiet way of saying she was still safe, still watched over. What made that moment so powerful wasn't just the confrontation. It was the unspoken humanity behind it. The Hells Angels didn't know her. They didn't ask for anything in return. They saw someone in trouble and acted. In a world where people often look away, pretending not to notice, that kind of courage stands out. The night ended as quietly as it began. The neon sign buzzed, the coffee pot hissed, and the diner returned to its usual rhythm. But for one young woman, everything had changed. She would always remember the strangers who became her protectors, the men everyone feared who turned out to be her saviors. The story of that night became a reminder that kindness often comes from the most unexpected places. And sometimes the people who look the toughest are the ones with the biggest hearts.